Hello, this is Hatchet, Chapter 2, read by me, Mr. Leary. It's still me again. This Hatchet Chapter 2 screencastify will have to be in two parts because YouTube said that the video I originally made of the whole chapter was too long. Arrgh, that makes me mad. So I had to do it in two parts. So here we go. So here's Chapter 2. This is a summary of the events of Chapter 1 to get you ready for Chapter 2. In Chapter 1, Brian is in a small plane called the Cessna 406. He is traveling to Canada to see his father. The only passengers are him and the pilot. During the flight, the pilot briefly shows him how to fly the plane using the steering wheel and the rudder pedals. Brian also thinks of his parents' divorce and how that is the reason why he's in the plane now, because he has to go visit his father in the summers and stay with his mom the rest of the year. Pardon me. Brian then notices that the pilot is in discomfort. The pilot has gas and has pains in his arm and chest. Soon, the pilot has a heart attack. Brian then realizes that he is all alone in the plane. He will have to fly the plane now and somehow try to land it if he wants to live. So here begins the events of Chapter 2. In this chapter, again, I will include a picture and slide for each page of the chapter. There is an alternate cover to Hatchet, as has been published many times. There's just a different cover for the same book. So Chapter 2, this will be pages 13 through 18. Page 13, the pilot hits turbulence, which is air that shakes the plane. So you can see a picture of turbulence there. But here's the text from the book. For a time that he could not understand, Brian could do nothing. Even after his mind began working and he could see what had happened, he could do nothing. It was as if his hands and arms were lead. Then he looked for ways for it not to have happened. Be asleep. His mind screamed at the pilot. Just be asleep and your eyes will open now, and your hands will take the controls, and your feet will move to the pedals, but it did not happen. The pilot did not move, except that his head rolled on a neck impossibly loose as the plane hit a small bit of turbulence. Somehow the plane was still flying. Seconds had, page 14, passed, nearly a minute, and the plane flew on as if nothing had happened, and he had to do something, but did not know what. Help! He had to help. He stretched one hand toward the pilot, saw that his fingers were trembling, and touched the pilot on the chest. He did not know what to do. He knew there were procedures that you could do mouth-to-mouth on victims of heart attacks and push their chests, CPR, but he did not know how to do it, and in any case could not do it with the pilot who was sitting up in the seat and still strapped in his seatbelt. So he touched the pilot with the tips of his fingers, touched him on the chest, and could feel nothing. No heartbeat, no rise and fall of breathing, which meant that the pilot was almost certainly dead. Please, Brian said, but did not know what or who to ask. Please. The plane lurched again, hit more turbulence, and Brian felt the nose drop. It did not dive, but the nose went down slightly, and the down angle increased the speed. And he knew that at this slight angle down, he would ultimately fly into the trees. He could see them ahead on the horizon, where before he could see only sky. Page 15. He had to fly it somehow, had to fly the plane. He had to help himself. The pilot was gone, beyond anything he could do. He had to try and fly the plane. He turned back in the seat, facing the front, and put his hands, still trembling, on the control wheel. His feet gently on the rudder pedals. He pulled back on the stick to raise the plane. He knew that from reading. He always pulled back on the wheel. He gave it a tug, and it slid back toward him easily, too easily. The plane, with its increased speed from the tilt down, swooped eagerly up and drove Brian's stomach down. He pushed the wheel back in, went too far this time, and the plane's nose went below the horizon, and the engine speed increased with the shallow dive. Too much. He pulled back again, more gently this time, and the nose floated up again. Too far, but not as violently as before. Then down a bit too much, and up again, very easily, and the front of the engine cowling settled. When he had it aimed at the horizon, and it seemed to be steady, he held the wheel where it was, let out his breath, which had been holding all this time, and tried to think what to do next. It was a clear blue sky day, with fluffy bits of clouds here and there, and he looked out the window, page 16, for a moment, hoping to see something, a town or village, but there was nothing. Just the green of the trees, endless trees, and lakes scattered more and more thickly as the plane flew. Where? He was flying, but did not know where, had no idea where he was going. He looked at the dashboard of the plane, studied the dials, and hoped to get some help. Hoped to find a compass, but it was all so confusing, a jumble of numbers and lights. One lighted display in the top center of the dashboard said the number 342. Another next to it said 22. Down beneath that were dials with lines that seemed to indicate what the wings were doing, tipping or moving, and one dial with the needle pointing to the number 70, which he only thought, might be the altimeter, the device that told him his height above the ground, or above sea level. Somewhere he had read something about altimeters, but he couldn't remember what, or where, or anything about them. Slightly to the left and below the altimeter, he saw a small rectangular panel with a lighted dial and two knobs. His eyes had passed over it 2 or 3 times before he saw what was written in tiny letters on top of the panel. Transmitter 221 was stamped into the metal, and it hit him, finally, that this was the radio. The radio, of course. He had to use the radio. When the pilot had been hit that way, page 17, he couldn't bring himself to say that the pilot was dead, couldn't think it. He had been trying to use the radio. Brian looked to the pilot. The headset was still on his head, turned sideways a bit from his jamming back into the seat, and the microphone switch was clipped into his belt. Brian had to get the headset from the pilot, had to reach over and get the headset from the pilot, or he could not be able to use the radio to call for help. He had to reach over. His hands began trembling again. He did not want to touch the pilot, did not want to reach for him, but he had to get the radio. He lifted his hands from the wheel just slightly and held them, waiting to see what would happen. The plane flew on normally, smoothly. All right, he thought, now to do this thing. He turned and reached for the headset, slid it from the pilot's head, one eye on the plane, waiting for it to dive. The headset came easily, but the microphone switch at the pilot's belt was jammed in, and he had to pull it to get it loose. Then, when he pulled, his elbow bumped the wheel and pushed it in, and the plane started down in a shallow dive. Brian grabbed, page 18, the wheel and pulled it back. Too hard again, and the plane went through another series of stomach-wrenching swoops and down before he could get it under control. When things had settled again, he pulled at the mic cord once more, and at last jerked the cord free. It took him another second or two to place the headset on his own head and position the small microphone tube in front of his mouth. He had seen the pilot use it, had seen him depress the switch at his belt, so Brian pushed the switch in and blew into the mic. He heard the sound of his breath in the headset. "Hello, is anybody there listening on this? Hello!" He repeated it 2 or 3 times and then waited, but heard nothing except his own breathing. Panic came then. He had been afraid, had been stopped with the terror of what was happening, but now panic came, and he began to scream into the microphone, scream over and over. "Help! Somebody help me! I'm in this plane and don't know! Don't know! Don't know!" And he started crying with the screams, crying and slamming his hands against the wheel of the plane, causing it to jerk down, then back up. But again, he heard nothing but the sounds of his own sobs in the microphone, his own screams mocking him, coming back into his ears. Okay, this is where I will pause, page 18, and I will continue 19 with part 2 of this video. Hope you get to watch it.